All right. Good morning still. Morning. So, thank you for joining us for, how many years have we been doing this?
Since 2013, 10 years? 2013?
Sheesh, we're old. We're recording this, yeah?
Yes.
You just remember that.
Yeah,
All right, so, yeah, thank you for being here for this. I guess the 10th time we've been doing this, maybe with a slight break during COVID. And it's always a fun time for us to get together and talk about these things. Today, on Constitution Day, we have the discussion of the Bill of Rights, in particular, whether or not the Bill of Rights is under attack. Is there some sense in which there's a risk of, or some sort of attack, or what's the other way we put it here? Assault, I think was the other. Is it under assault? So that's the question that we have here. The way I'm going to run this is I have a few ready questions that I'm going to throw out here and let them discuss. I'm actually going to try to see in the spirit of Mr. Stewart's newfound love for all things AI. I've also that's not too strong a word, is it?
No, it's an average.
So, yeah. I am also going to see if we can't get a couple of interesting questions out of ChatGPT along the way too. So that may or may not. I will let you know when I ask one of those questions, so you're not fooled. Anyway, all right. And then at some point, what we'll do is we'll throw it out there to you guys, and if you have some questions. Periodically throughout the time, I'll see if anybody has any questions that they'd like to throw at the panel. So let's just start off with just a very basic. I'm going to ask this kind of two-part to anybody who wants to jump in.
Would you like us to introduce ourselves first?
No.
Okay. Sounds good to me.
Okay, yeah. We'll introduce. I'm going to let you guys do it as you go. Start with you, Scott.
All right. I'm Scott Williams, professor of history here. This is my 17th year here teaching at Weatherford College.
Jerry Stewart, professor of government, chair of social sciences department. This is my 3rd year teaching.
Jessica Lutke, adjunct U.S. history, my 2nd year.
I'm Tom Wells. I taught history full-time here for 28 years, retired 3 years ago. Before that, I taught history part-time for 15 years. I think that adds up to 43. I got Ivy going up 11.
I'm Daryl Castillo, faculty. I teach government and history here, and I've been teaching since the fall of '89, and this is my 11th year here at Weatherford College.
And I guess I'll tell you, I'm Greg Trickett. I am not any of those things. I'm the philosophy guy up here, and I've been teaching here for 14 years, I think, full-time. So, and they get a kick out of me being a part of this, so they ask me.
We do.
So, yeah. All right, so the question to throw out first is, two parts here. What is the Bill of Rights, and why was it necessary? Why was it needed?
Okay, the Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments. And whether it's necessary or not was a point of issue with the Constitutional Convention. I think what made it politically necessary is you're not going to get it ratified unless you have a Bill of Rights. Why would anybody oppose that? The opposition seemed to be that the states had their Bills of Rights. The concept at the time, holding over from the Articles of Confederation, is the states are sovereign states, they're countries. The Articles of Confederation was more like the UN in the day of the United States. The second article guaranteed each state full sovereignty, and the Congress would really be a clearinghouse. So that concept was carrying over. So if the federal government, I've got to just step into something to use that word. If the national government only had the powers delegated to it in the Constitution, why would it be necessary to restrict it from doing something it was not specifically allowed to do? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
It's a subject.
I'll riff off of that. So whenever the Constitution was first written, the states that were in favor of states' rights, right? Your strong state governments, mainly from the South, they were afraid that the Constitution was going to limit their own liberties due to the articles that Tom just talked about. And so they made an agreement at the Constitutional Convention in 1789, said, hey, we will ratify as soon as you ratify, you grant us these additional amendments. The reason why they had the amendments is because it was already written. It's kind of too late to go back and say, oh, we have these. There's no control Z. You're writing the Constitution, so you just had to add on to the end.
So we heard the historical, the political reason is that, and why the Bill of Rights exists, which are the first 10 amendments, is they serve to constrain the national government from interfering with individual civil liberties and civil rights. That's their whole purpose. The national government grants nothing in terms of our rights and civil liberties. And so, in fact, any government, even one as democratic as our own, small d, of course, it has to be constrained because it will try to control its entire environment. So the first 10 amendments were put in there to constrain the national government from taking away things that are naturally guaranteed to us as individuals.
And the 10th Amendment makes that very clear. It's sometimes called the Reserve Powers Clause. All the powers that weren't either assigned specifically to the federal government nor denied to the states belong to the states. So,
and it goes further than that, Tom. And if it's not granted to the people, if it's not granted to the states, it belongs to the people.
so it's assumed the people have the rights up front. The government is there. Job one is protecting our freedom. But governments acquire power like snowballs rolling down. Yeah.
All right. Anybody else? Good?
Well, I think this whole debate is taking place among a very small group of people. I mean, you've got the small group of people who are at the Constitutional Convention, who are all white and male, and a very heavy percentage of them own slaves or benefit from slave business of some sort. And they are the ones who essentially bring the Constitution out of the Constitutional Convention, with the only option being a yes or no vote to it, not a yes, but I would like to change it. That's the reason you need something like the Bill of Rights in order to change that. But even when you're sending it out to the states for the Bill of Rights, you are still sending it to who actually has the political power to discuss, talk, and vote on this, which is still white men with property, who are the only ones who are able to actually have a political discussion about this and to be able to vote on whether to include the Bill of Rights or not. And so I just want to kind of add that to make sure we know that we're talking about something that's being debated among a very small group of people at the top of the society that exists at that point in time. And so this is something that when we talk about later, you're going to talk about why is the Bill of Rights in contention now. The Bill of Rights was being debated about this very small group of people, and today we are a huge country and a very multicultural, pluralistic country, which makes it very different when you're looking at how you apply these things.
Well, far be it from me to defend old white fossils, but I think
for a group of old white male misogynistic fossils, they're a far better cry than the fossils that are in control of the government in both parties today.
You'll hear no objection from me.
Just an observation.
Well, that was what they warned of in the Federalist Papers, that if you gave too much power to the people, then you would end up with,
Donald Trump?
demagogues and unsuitable people. Yeah, I mean, that's basically what the Federalists, or the people who, argued for the Constitution, basically said, that if you let...
And history is pouring them out.
Yeah, if you open up to the rabble, us, to be able to make choices, then we will make bad choices, and we will put bad people in power, and that's what they said.
Entitled white guys.
Yeah, if you can leave it to that chosen group of people, if only you get that group of people, then only the best results will come from it, because they are the best people to make that decision.
ironic in a society that's looking for diversity and plurality.
Yes,
Well, the
and it's
irony-
run by still largely old white men.
The irony is that the ideology behind a republic, right, which is what our nation is supposed to be, and technically at the core foundation what it is that you have men in power, always men of course, that are highly virtuistic, right? They're not called to politics for its money or for its prestige. They're called to politics because they're called to serve, right? That's why we have George Washington as the first president who was elected unanimously, and then the second term, and then he decides to step down, right? Because he's not in it for what can this position do for me. He's already rich, he already owns slaves, he's already got a plantation, he's making buku money up in Mount Vernon.
Unless you're a senator from New Jersey, and then of course,
Gold bars.
Or a
Gold
businessman
bars
from
in
New York. So that was the ideal, and it's anytime you base something off of an ideal, it's immediately gonna get screwed.
To that end, I said this a lot in my class, that the founders were adorably naive about a lot of things, right? I mean, for example, we talked about this in one of my classes today, that one of the checks on the president was that the president would be so virtuous, they would never do anything that was untoward or corrupt.
Yeah.
Oh,
So was
okay.
that, is
Right.
that, I want to follow on that, is, do you think there's a sense in which the naivety, so I think we might want to draw a line between pure naivety and political idealism, right? Maybe naivety versus political hopefulness, which is how I would define political idealism, right? So to what extent, so maybe they were adorably naive, but couldn't we argue that they were also maybe adorably idealistic in their thinking about what this new government would or would not be?
I don't think the founding brothers of this country were politically naive. I think they were idealistic, because
What's the difference?
No. Think about this.
No,
The way
that's
they constructed the government with checks and balances, the very structure and how they interact with each other.
How are checks and balances working?
Showed a very high propensity on their part to knowing human nature. Remember, they were
All of it is
educated.
based on human nature,
They were classicists. Their education was
But
based on
Sweden's
classicist.
human nature, not their own. They saw themselves as above that, right? You create a contract to rule them, not the people that are ruling. So I think their naivety maybe comes from the fact that they were so elitist, they thought they would be the only ones that would ever rule.
I think they had any illusions about human nature.
No, they did not have.
No, I don't think so either, but I think that they thought they were above that they were more reasoned.
That while they may
That's why they thought they should rule.
that while maybe they were susceptible to human nature, they have somehow risen above their
Yeah,
own nature.
the founders used the expression excessive democracy. They were afraid of excessive democracy. What does that mean? Too much input from people?
Andrew Jackson.
It's, well, by normal definition, I think you can look at that and say the idea of like having excessive democracy, too much input from the people might seem a little ludicrous.
Yeah.
Democracy was a synonym for mob rule.
Many folks still want to call it that, yeah.
Oh, the very term democracy comes from the Greek, demos and kratos, power to the people.
So democracy, you have to have some democracy for legitimacy.
Sure.
Democracy's like
Just in
fire.
there.
If you cook your food, you can burn your house down. It has to be in its place, so to speak.
Well, that's one of the reasons why they limited who gets a say in the government, right? They didn't right off the bat grant suffrage to women, they could have,
Or people of color.
or people of color, which they could have right off the bat, right? There were arguments being made at the Constitutional Convention about these things. Thomas Jefferson himself said, no, we should do that, but if we do that, then we leave ourselves open for all kinds of, what is it we're saying, excessive democracy? So they knew, we have to limit who has a say.
Yeah. The idea of unlimited, or what was the phrase?
Limited democracy.
Excessive
Excessive
democracy. Just a little input here from a philosophical standpoint. It reminds me of Plato and how Plato thought about these things, which, let's be honest, was probably informing them to some degree.
Pretty much,
They
yeah.
weren't idiots, right?
Yeah,
They were
classicists,
educated people. And so for those of you who don't know, Plato believed that democracy was the second worst form of government. because when you put power in the hands of the people are made up of everybody, from the super virtuous and intelligent to the super ignorant and vicious. And when you do that, you end up stalling government or creating a government, particularly if your democracy has somebody at the top. Then what you end up doing is you elect somebody from the people to go up to the top, and that person becomes a self-interested, self-important dictator or tyrant. And so the worry that Plato had, which may be a similar worry that the Founding Fathers had, is that if we do this, anybody can get up here, and if anybody can get up here, then that person, corrupted by their own human nature, will become a tyrant, and then everything collapses, right? Which, by the way, I mean, you know, not wrong necessarily.
There's some
I mean,
merit
you
to
know,
that, yeah.
so. All right. So let's shift this way. I haven't gotten to ChatGPT yet, just so you know. But let's shift this way. So good discussion so far. If the Bill of Rights is under assault or under attack, from where is the attack coming?
Extremism from both the left and the right. For instance, and I said this in class the other day. For instance, a United States District Court, the U.S. District, Federal U.S. District Court, a Reagan appointee, just recently overturned the recently passed Texas law from this legislative session that made it illegal to have drag shows in public school. Which this jurist, conservative, appointed by Reagan, said it was a violation of the First Amendment. And whether you agree with what drag shows are doing, limiting someone's free speech it's an abrogation of the First Amendment. So that Texas law, whether you agree with it or not, was assaulting the First Amendment from a conservative perspective.
There's some poll numbers, I don't know the name of the poll, came out earlier this week, I think. And whereas Democrats used to be very enthusiastic defenders of free speech, this poll showed that roughly 40% of the poll respondents who identified as Democrats thought free speech was a bad idea.
Isn't the Republican Party burning books to stay warm?
It's not like you're burning, okay, do you want your kids exposed to pornography in the second grade?
Define pornography.
That's
It's like that.
There's
federal
kids being
judge.
exposed to
Yeah,
pornography in the
it's
second
it's
grade.
like the federal,
Yeah.
it's like the federal judge says,
I think
I
this
don't
is
know what
hyperbole
pornography
that's
is.
been to incite and not inform.
That was,
That was health, yeah. Yeah, Jesse Helms. I don't know what pornography is, but I know what it is when I see it.
I know it when I see it.
I know when I see it.
Which conjures all these images of them sitting in the basement of the Capitol watching a lot of pornography, trying to determine whether it is that.
on the list of other
Well, and you also have senators who are showing pornography on the Senate floor, so,
I believe Hunter Biden's penis was shown by a Republican member of Congress,
and sent to all the constituents.
which is, I think, illegal. You can't do that.
I mean, I don't know.
We digress.
This is how these panels work, y'all, we just digress into whatever. But I think the question that you're asking is, you know, who is doing the attacking, who's doing the assaulting? And it can be from multiple groups.
Right.
There isn't a single homogenous group that is saying, yes, we all band together, all of us are saying this, right? Even within the different parties, you have different sects who are saying, well, we'll accept this, but not this. And then this one's saying, well, we don't accept that, but we accept this. But they're all calling themselves Republicans or Democrats. You also have attackers from the state level, right? The state senators who are attacking the federal or the national power, how are we saying this one? The national power. So it's being attacked on all sides in different ways and different forms. So the question would have to be more specific to say, how is this amendment being attacked, or how is this aspect of the Bill of Rights being attacked, so that we can get more specific other than just the pornography.
I mean, we're all granted the First Amendment of free speech, right? But it's been constrained through various Supreme Court rulings. freedoms. For instance, you have the First Amendment right to free speech, but not the freedom to hide in a crowded, dark theater and yell fire. You're not protected by the First Amendment if you do that.
Right, so that brings me to something else, and think about your questions, because after I ask this one, I'm going to throw it out to, if there's any questions out here. But I want to follow up on this, because a lot of people would say that that is under attack. I mean, obviously, the direction that we go here, what's implied, if not explicitly stated, is that there's a lot of partisan politics around the opinions about from where it's being attacked. There's a lot on both sides of the parties that would say it's being attacked, and certain ones are being attacked, right? More conservatives might say that my Second Amendment rights are being attacked, and some of more liberal Democrats might say my First Amendment rights are being attacked in certain ways. So you mentioned, the Supreme Court. To what extent is the Supreme Court relevant in each of these parties' idea about how the Bill of Rights are being attacked, right? So both parties are wanting to say that it's under attack. Both are probably going to point to the Supreme Court to some degree. What is their role? How does that work?
Judicial review.
The Supreme Court's the final authority on the meaning of the Constitution. That's been evolutionary over time. But,
They gave themselves that.
Yeah, they gave themselves that, but
Thank you.
at this point, we're all in agreement that they are the final authority on the meaning of the Constitution.
So both parties are in agreement there?
Depending on what the issue is.
I'm going to do something really uncomfortable and defend the Supreme Court for a second. I think they've got a really, really difficult job. Just look at the First Amendment alone, right? Professor Wills and I probably have tremendous disagreement about a lot of politics, but within the First Amendment alone, you've got the freedom of speech and the freedom of religion, right? What you're seeing is this court having to wrestle with these issues. Where does speech stop? Where does religious freedom start, right? So some people would, my ability to refuse you service, right, because of your whatever, because of my religion. These are questions that are still going on. All of that's just one amendment. And because Congress really hasn't put very clear guidelines and we don't have really other rules to go by, we're putting this on the Supreme Court going, hey, we don't know how to deal with it, y'all deal with this. So the Supreme Court, with every decision, is going to make about half of the country angry. Your side or the other side, right? So I hate to defend them, but in the same respect, they've got a really difficult job because they're trying to be faithful to the language of this thing, but there's nothing in this thing about the internet, right, or 2023 challenges. So they try to make this thing adapt to today while still respecting what the founders and the people had in mind. It's a tough job. I don't want to be a Supreme Court justice, right? It's good job security, but no, it's tough. So yeah, half of the country is going to be angry and blame them, but the other half is going to be like, that was a good idea. So
Yeah.
you know.
So questions? Anybody? Yes.
You spoke of how difficult the Supreme Court's job actually is because there's no modern indications within the Constitution and Bill of Rights. Do you think that at any point it should be rewritten? And if so, who would write it?
What was last year?
Yeah, we did that last year.
Let me-
But excellent question.
Very good question. That was our topic last year. The Constitution was written purposefully with a lot of ambiguity. Okay, and then there's the elastic clause in the Constitution that allows it to be adaptable. Right. So let me give you an example. Congress has the right to regulate interstate commerce, but nowhere in the Constitution is interstate commerce defined. And so I think we can all agree in common sense that an airplane flying from one coast to the other before heavier than air traffic was even ever considered is interstate commerce. Therefore, Congress can regulate the airline industry. So some ambiguity is a good thing, you know. I mean, it allows the Constitution to be adaptable to AI 2023. You know, I mean, little did the founding brothers of this country realize that at
at some point, people of color and women were going to be demanding equal rights. Okay, and, you know, and-
How dare we? I think to give you a good example of what he just mentioned with interstate commerce and the fact that it's not defined, and to kind of tie it back into the Supreme Court issues, is that we addressed this in the 1960s with the freedom rights, right? You had people who were testing the segregation laws within each state, and our ability to travel from one state to another on integrated or segregated buses, right? So you had freedom riders that were testing these federal laws. And the Supreme Court had to address it, JFK had to address it, mainly because these freedom riders were being attacked and killed for testing the law. So that's one case where the Supreme Court had to sit there and ask themselves, okay, what is interstate commerce? Does this apply? Do we have the power to regulate this?
Well, and that's where a lot of these definitions come from. I mean, Daryl, you brought up the right to yell fire in a crowded theater or something like that. I mean, we have made those adjustments over time, and I would argue that the Supreme Court has had outsized influence in creating what the Constitution said. Again, a role it defined for itself that it would say what the Constitution is. It has now become so much of that Congress almost gets left out of a lot of these things. One of the things I said last year on the panel was that the Supreme Court is this final arbiter. It's not like they say a law is unconstitutional and then it gets sent back to the House and Senate to rework it to make it more constitutional. It's just like, okay, no, you can never do that again because we have determined it to be unconstitutional.
they nullified it.
Yeah, and it's again, that's a role that they have essentially taken on themselves and said when we say a law is unconstitutional, it can be nullified. So back to your question, how do you fix something like that? When you've got self-defining entities that basically say the thing that we say is right and nobody can argue with us, how do you fix that? I don't know. I mean, I don't think we had a great answer last year for answering your question that you had, and I don't know that I have any better answer this year because I think each institution acts to protect itself and its own power, and anything beyond, anything that's not a revolution, anything prior to that requires the people in power to say, I'm going to give up some of my power in the name of reform. And just look at gerrymandering. That doesn't happen. People in power consolidate their power. They don't get rid of their power or limit their power.
First Supreme Court decision that attempted to define interstate commerce came down in 1819, and Chief Justice John Marshall, it's as if he's pouring a foundation. If he defines that strictly, you got a foundation that holds like a pump house or something, garden shed. Instead, there's this vast, almost limitless definition that holds the Mall of America. So he opens the door wide open. So Marshall is your first judicial activist who did more early on to spin us off the rails, so to speak, and get away from the original Constitution.
Which is hilarious because he was a Federalist to the core.
Yeah, he and Thomas Jefferson were cousins. They didn't like each other at all.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Would you say that the Bill of Rights serves a function to support the Constitution's ambiguity, or would you say it serves a protective function to protect the Republic overall?
Okay, I think at the time, the Bill of Rights were sort of a concession to the Anti-Federalists, it addressed some of their concerns, that once this thing gets started, what actually is there to keep the federal government from just ending up controlling everything. So you put things in there that, like the 10th Amendment, that are intended to stop that, and somewhat controversially, to prohibit the federal government from doing things that it was not specifically allowed to do in the Constitution. And that didn't seem to make all that much sense. Why would you prohibit it from, since it can only do what it specifically, we only have the enumerated powers, no implied powers, it just seemed redundant. But, as things go, constitutional law has greater to do with the Constitution.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Hey,
I do have a question. Do you think that they allowed the Bill of Rights to be added as a way to like pacify the people temporarily? Like, do you think they intended it to be a long-term solution, or kind of just like, hey, let's add these so we can get it passed, and then we'll figure it out later, or whoever else is after us will deal with it? Do you think?
You had to have 9 states to ratify the Constitution to put it into effect.
Yeah, short answer is yes.
Obviously.
Short answer is yes to every single thing you said.
Massachusetts ratified by a very narrow margin in their convention. They did that because of a promise that amendments would be added. Same with Virginia. Virginia really didn't want to do this. They sort of came in cursing under their breath. They were the 10th state. New Hampshire had already put it over the top a few days earlier. They couldn't have heard about it by then. So yeah, it's there to get certain states to come on along. And when the thing went into effect and the first Congress met, Washington was sworn in, there were only 11 states because the North Carolina Convention had met, unanimously rejected and adjourned. And they held out until the Bill of Rights had been formally proposed. Rhode Island did not summon the convention. They didn't send anybody to the Constitutional Convention, they didn't summon a ratifying convention, and they just barely avoided being the 14th state. So they too held out to make sure that there were going to be these things added.
So I want to be sent for appeasement.
To your question about like, was it meant to be long-term? Really, none of this was meant to be long-term, right? The Constitution was kind of written like, all right, well, you guys can come back to this and take another stab at it in a few years. And meanwhile, we're like, no, we're keeping it. It's ours, right? And so we've like fiercely defended it in its common form. That's very
Madison
important.
himself fought to the last ditch to keep it from happening, but
Yeah.
he realized half a loaf is better than none. I'm putting this in there.
Yeah, yeah.
That we have to have it, so he himself authored the first, they proposed 12 amendments. The states ratified 10. One of them doesn't, it's still pending because it didn't have an expiration date. But it's nowhere. How many population, what population gets the representative, that kind of thing. There was another one that would have been the Second Amendment, and it provided that if Congress votes itself a pay raise, it doesn't kick in until the next congressional term, i.e. after the next election.
We should try that one now.
It was ratified in 1992. Do you know that?
No.
It was proposed in 1789, ratified in 1992.
which amendment is it?
It's the 27th. What the deal was, usually it was a tax protest sort of thing. In the mid-1980s, a Weatherford College graduate was the Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives. And he cooked up this scheme where Congress could vote itself a pay raise without anybody having to cast a vote on it. They set up an outside commission which would recommend pay raises that would take effect automatically unless both houses agreed not to. And so this commission is set up, so recommended.
Is there a way?
Don't you just love graft and corruption?
Yeah,
It's all graft and corruption,
I
Mike.
admire the organization.
A 50% pay hike, and the Senate immediately, unanimously, and contemptuously said no. The House waited till the expiration date to get to it, and they got all tangled up. Parliamentary procedure, doggone guys, it's 5 after. We're gonna have to take that pay raise. There was a DJ in Seattle or somewhere, this is just before talk radio gets here, and he took exception to that and started encouraging his listeners that if you don't like this, get a tea bag, i.e. tea party, and mail it to your congressman. And within a week or two, this had gone national, and there were 18 convoys of 18-wheelers bulging with envelopes containing tea bags converging on the Capitol, so they quickly backtracked, and the Speaker lost his job for that and other reasons.
So I like the part of the story where that miracle on 34th Street at the whole process, right?
Yeah.
Did we just skip over that it was a Weatherford college grad?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what you want to do, folks. The skills we
I'm
teach
still
you.
trying
This
to
is the
think
power we're
if
dealing
there's a
with.
similar loophole that faculty might be able to.
That's what I'm saying.
Hey, I'll get on board with
How can
that.
we do that as
All right.
faculty?
But I want to come back to
Go
answer,
ahead.
to pull off of what Jared said back on the permanence or non-permanence of the idea of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. I mean, you have to remember that all these people in the room have just seen the first try they had at a government, the Articles of Confederation, basically implode and fall apart.
Big time.
And you will notice there's nothing in the Constitution that says this is the one and only thing that we will ever do from this point forward, because they didn't know if.
The supreme law of the land.
But They didn't know how long that would be the supreme law of the land because they thought they'd had a previous supreme law of the land that was going to work just fine, and it didn't. And so,
This was 2.0.
yeah, did they think that this would be the permanent thing that we would still be using in 2023?
Okay, let me interject there. I do think they did think that.
Yeah, they thought that
it was
in
gonna be
person, too.
permanent, because you see that in the preamble,
Yeah.
right? We do ordain this constitution, and we bequeath this to future generations. They really did think it was gonna last a long time.
But I would argue that the Articles of Confederation people also thought that what they did was going to last for a long time.
Well,
I would argue if you omit that language, there's no legitimacy. Sorry, Jess, go ahead.
Well, Jefferson even said, hey, we should revisit this in 10 to 20 years. And every 10 to 20 years, we should revisit that, and then that, and then that.
Jefferson had both feet planted firmly in midair. You never knew which mess of Tom would go.
But it's only.
But does that discredit his legitimacy as a founding father?
No, but
And as part of-
but that's only human nature. We seem to canonize things and institutionalize it, and we don't want to mess with it because it's been done that way and just leave it alone. So that's only human nature.
but we're not leaving it alone, we're adding amendments.
What was Jefferson's,
Not very many.
They understood.
what was Jefferson's line about a little bit of
History.
revolution?
Oh, a little bit of revolution's okay.
Yeah, so we need a little bit every
The
now
tree
and
of
then.
liberty must be watered with the blood of patriots.
Okay, so we're gonna move on, unless there's any other pressing, yeah, you guys still have your knives in your pockets, everything's good? Okay, we're good. All right. Yeah, right, okay. So, this question comes from ChatGPT. So I'm thinking of this on the heels of the idea of who is attacking, right? Because that still seems very muddy to me, right? I mean, if it's under assault from some person, groups of persons, whatever. And it seems like, well, it's everybody is attacking it, is what it sounds like. So here's the question, though. How does modern media and information environment shape public perceptions of the Bill of Rights? And are there concerns about misinformation, disinformation, impacting public understanding of constitutional rights? And is there some attack in that neighborhood?
I'd say the Bill of
Yes.
Rights as a whole is not under attack. I mean, nobody's going after the Fourth Amendment or the Fifth Amendment or anything like that.
I disagree.
The Supreme
The Fourth
Court-
Amendment's
I was
under
gonna say, Fourth
assault by the
Amendment.
USA Patriot Act. Come on, when everything come in without a warrant, under anti-terrorism, and arrest you because you happen to be a person of color, or they racially profile you because you're Muslim.
Access to your Twitter account.
Yeah, I mean, they access your Twitter account. No, I have to vehemently disagree with that.
The Fifth Amendment was simply laid aside decades ago. The controversial one seemed to be the Second Amendment. Everybody knows about that. I mean, why is it there? It was written by a generation of people who had taken up arms to fend off tyranny. That was a thinkable thought to them because they've done it. And they wanted to preserve that. That's basically why it's there. In any event, they didn't put it there because the deer were coming after us. The First Amendment now is picking up some flack. People think free speech is a bad idea, and you mentioned a couple of words which we should all reject. Disinformation, for example, belongs to the vocabulary of totalitarian dictatorships. That's where the state claims.
So, hold on, you believe there's no such thing as disinformation?
Oh, no. That grew out of the pandemic scare, I think. The fog
Well, but
about-
that's not my question. Do you believe there's such a thing as
Yes,
disinformation?
yes.
Who he's asking?
If you accept that concept, then you accept the idea that the government can regulate speech, which it's trying to do. There's actually a ruling forbidding the
Okay.
federal government from outsourcing censorship.
Great, so I'll leave it to somebody else then who might want to answer the question. Is there such a thing as disinformation?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's,
Give us an example, please.
the USS Maine was blown up by the Spanish. Yellow journalism and
It's
the
125 years to figure that out.
but the point I'm trying to make is that disinformation is not anything new. We're just giving it new names. We
Walter
brought,
Tonkin, WMDs in Iraq, there's any number of things, but let's talk about disinformation being spread by civilians to other civilians.
Yeah, it doesn't have
That's-
to have any.
yeah.
To Greg's point, asking about social media, right? Facebook tried to tamp down on this during COVID because people were spreading straight up disinformation about
Such
how medical science works, for example, right? But sticking
Turns out
sunshine
much of the
under.
disinformation was true, and the official information was completely false. So you have to have free speech, have some correct.
Well, I guess the
Then
idea,
there's the guy that saved 282,000 lives by wearing a mask driving his car by himself.
the idea though is that if there is any kind of false information out there, would that information not be, if it's distributed, would that information not, I'm gonna ask somebody else to answer this one, Tom. Would that information not, by definition, be misinformation or
Who
disinformation?
defines that?
Is yelling fire in a
Well, I
crowded,
would say
is yelling
words.
fire in a crowded theater when there is no fire, is that misinformation?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, but that's why the Supreme Court said it's not protected by the First Amendment.
I mean, they basically, yeah, we have this thing that says, here is misinformation that you do not have the right to share because it actively hurts other people. It actively hurts the government or not a
But
government.
I think the point that, I think the point you're trying to make, I think the point you're trying to make is, you know, there's fundamental disagreements about what constitutes free speech. And if it doesn't conform to my little box, then no, it's not protected. In fact, we just had that conversation in my morning class at 7:30, right? Burning the American flag, okay, is protected by the First Amendment.
As is kneeling when the
There's a
national
Supreme Court. I
anthem
mean,
is.
I may vehemently disagree with somebody burning. In fact, I'll probably go try to beat the hell out of them if I see that. You know, that will be my visceral response. But it's protected free speech.
Yeah.
No more than I disagree. I mean, with someone kneeling, you know. But it's free speech.
The Westboro Baptist Church taking signs, really offensive signs to veterans' funerals.
Exactly.
is protected
It's
speech.
protected by
It
free
makes you
speech.
uncomfortable,
Yeah,
but it's
very
protected.
uncomfortable.
Well, we see people being censored on Facebook and that sort of thing. And they have legal protections based on their claim to be a neutral platform. I mean, they can restrict pornography, they do that kind of thing. But
It's not that
they
it's
should
a,
take away those protections because they're non-neutral.
well, it's
Yeah,
not that
but
it's
we
a
have the
neutral.
freedom to get off of Facebook.
The argument that they're making is not that it's a neutral platform, that it's a public platform. And it's a private company that can make its own rules.
And it's in cahoots with the state. And the state's not censoring you, but they're hand in glove.
Yeah, so I want to get back to the point of what I think, and I'm gonna correct you, Jared. It wasn't my point. It's ChatGPT's point.
Correct.
So,
It was the Terminator's point.
Yeah, let's give credit where it is due, please. But I think the point of the question wasn't about whether or not the state has a responsibility to squash misinformation or disinformation. So it's not a question about freedom of speech per se. It's a question about whether or not perpetuating misinformation and disinformation affects people's perceptions of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, particularly the contested Bill of Rights, which shapes how they think about it. So then the question there would be, I guess, when we come back to this idea about from where is the attack coming, it almost feels like the call's coming from inside the house. We're attacking it ourselves to some degree, to the extent that we willingly participate in spreading lies, rumor, and falsehoods about these things.
Well, this is something that I did in a talk for the interdisciplinary conference a couple of years ago. If you look at kind of Americans' trust of government, we moved from roughly 1963 when polling said that roughly 70 to 80% of the American people fundamentally trusted the federal government to do what was right. And by 1973, only about 30% of the American people trusted the federal government to do what is right. And we have stayed in that 30 to 40% range all the way through today, except 9/11, we get a little bit of a spike up and stuff like that. But essentially we've stayed right there. And I mean, if you listen to what people are saying up here, we have an inherent conspiracy theory approach to life where we see evil behind everything that we don't agree with. If we don't agree with it, then there are these shadow people behind that are out there trying to destroy the world that we live in.
It wasn't so shadow. I mean, 1973 was a pivotal year.
Oh, no, I mean, there are reasons, I could go into all the reasons why we have that. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that.
Because of Jared's hero, Richard Nixon.
Yeah.
And Watergate.
Yeah, but it comes from Vietnam before that, but, I mean, as I said, I think it's prior to, I'm saying it's prior to social media, it's prior to all that. I mean, we come in, and I make this point to my students, we come in and my generation, which is also most of their parents' generation, and in some cases, considering how young they are, maybe even their grandparents' generation, have all grown up in a period of time where nobody trusts the government. And so we have an inherent thing of, if we hear something that we don't like, from whatever political perspective we're in, we inherently look at it and say, well, it's the government's fault that this is happening, and we put all of this pressure and idea on that's where things are coming from. And that leaves us, with this real sense of, why would we trust the Bill of Rights to give us the things that we're supposed to get if we don't trust the government in any way?
The institutions that are pending.
I'm gonna go off that for a second. So if you can't trust the government, who do you trust? And in the 70s, at the same time, going back to your hero Nixon, right? We learned with Watergate that we trust the press. You trust the press to give you those truths about the government. And so in the 70s, you see this...
On the Pentagon Papers and other things out of the press.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
So you have this inherent belief that, well, you can't trust what the government's telling you, so we're going to trust these other people to tell us what the government's really doing. And
Which is protected by the First Amendment.
Yes.
so as you get away from the 70s, there's still this somehow belief that whatever the news is telling you is true, or there's facets of truth. I do this experiment with some of my classes where I have them pick one topic and find all of the articles from these different publications, all of them, across the spectrum, to tell me what was the event. And they have to figure out the bias that is within each one of these publications to tell me just the facts. And the facts are there, but they're skewed in such a way that to make you feel something, to make you believe in their opinion about this.
You mean there's no unbiased perspective from the media?
If you want unbiased America media, go to BBC.
Yeah, go to BBC.
Yeah.
If we had
I
stuck
think
by
their
the
platform should be, we're as unbiased as we can be. That's what it should be.
When
But
it comes
in
to
any
the
case-
Americans.
If
Yeah.
we had stuck by the Constitution as the writers intended, I don't think any of these things would be issues.
Yes, if only white men had power and only white men were listened to with property, then everything would be
I can't
great.
think of anything in the Constitution that's specific about that. That was the world they lived in.
Well, but as the world evolves, you have to adjust how we understand the Bill of Rights to,
That's why we have to live in the process.
fair enough.
So
So,
be quick and easy.
somebody who had, yeah,
I
go
have a
ahead.
question. So you guys are saying that, you mentioned that 70% of people completely distrust the government, right? That's an overwhelming majority.
Yeah.
Are you saying the solution is that we should now just trust the government? Because
We
to
don't
me it
trust
seems like we
anybody.
should
No, we
fundamentally...
don't trust anybody.
No, what I'm saying is, if the overwhelming majority of people disagree that the government is even good, why do we still abide by all of these things when it's clear that they don't even hold the country together anymore?
I raised this in my class, that we are a country that believes that our country is the best government, best country that has ever existed, and we all hate it. And it never makes any sense to me, but it's also, I think, going back to the first question, the first question there, we don't have a lot of ability to have an alternative because it is such an entrenched system right now.
But would
I
it,
mean, what is the percentage of, anybody know the percentage of incumbents getting reelected?
87%.
Yeah, 87% of incumbents get reelected, which means, I don't know where a change comes from, sorry. That's not exactly what you were asking, but I was pulling back.
so
to the other
what would you guys, I guess I'm opening a question panel, I don't know if I'm allowed to do that, but what would the solution be then? Because to me it seems that we need a change of government if it doesn't work.
Vote. And this is, I'm not being facetious, vote. Your generation, specifically 18 to 35-year-olds, do not vote, which means older folks, like the people on this panel, quite frankly, aren't voting. Right? This point, right? Why 87% of incumbents get elected, right? We hate government. We hate Congress. We don't trust Congress. In my class, we talk about statistics. We actually like the idea of the United States becoming communist more than we like Congress. All right, that's true. Polls show this bearing out. So, but why do we keep electing 87%? Because you like your congressperson. It's those other people that are the problem, right?
That's the problem with term limits. You want to term limit somebody else's term.
That's fine. That's something we can absolutely discuss, right? But the problem is we don't have enough turnover. Your generation needs to get out and vote. Vote for people that you believe in. Vote for people that espouse your ideas, your principles. One of the reasons you feel so disconnected from government, quite frankly, justifiably, is that you look at the people in government and they don't look like you. They don't care anything about the things you care about. Most of the people in the Senate right now dealing with internet privacy don't know how to send an email. Right? Yeah, you've got these people making these incredibly important decisions about artificial intelligence, something that's going to run the country someday. I cannot express enough. Everybody that you can in your age group needs to vote, not just vote, run for office. I've told everybody in every one of my classes, I don't care what party you are, Democrat, Republican, or in between, if you run for office, hit me up, I will give you money. Not much, because I'm poor, but I will give you money because I think it's so incredibly important. Yeah, that the next generation takes on. That's how you get trust back. You get trust back by getting inside. That's my opinion.
To be clear on this point, that issue that's not new. That you guys demographically have historically not voted.
Right.
So, and by you guys, I'm talking about younger people in the room. If you're older, you know who you are. Silently exclude yourself.
If you're older, you know who you are.
It's the Gen Z and millennials that we're talking about.
Yeah, but
Let's get specific about it. So.
But yeah, that's always been the case. But the thing that's different in this iteration of that being the case is what ChatGPT is pointing to, which is the media technology aspect of this, right? Social media is vastly different from anything we ever could have thought about before. And I think there's a real sense that that is part of what is doing. The other part, I'm sorry, I know I'm not on the panel, but I want to
this is why we invite you.
I think the other part of what you're talking about is this, that it is a very legitimate question. What's the fix? How do we solve this? But in order to know how to solve it, we have to come to terms with what causes the problem and what the problem is. So the problem isn't just simply that certain of the Bill of Rights are under attack. We have to know who's attacking it and why. And that's part of what the panel is discussing. Once we understand that, then we can start to address maybe some solutions to this, right? That has to be a part of the conversation. But you're absolutely right. If we talk about things without thinking about solutions or where to go from here, then we're spinning our wheels. It's not worth much. You're absolutely right about that.
Some people think that the solution to what Jared was talking about is term limits. I'm skeptical because I know quite a bit about history and I can't think of any solution to any problem which, if implemented, did not eventually morph into a new problem in its own right. I can see that happening with term limits.
But then you don't do anything. Because every problem could theoretically be bad in the future, then you actually never do anything because, and then we just live with the status quo as it
I
is
think
right
what we have
now.
now is very, very large numbers of people who feel that their freedom is at risk. That might be true, might not. I think it is to some extent. I have grandchildren, so to me it's personal. I want them to live their lives in a free country. Every day that seems to slip further out of reach. So the government being, we all seem to assume an activist government. That's not the idea. It's there to make sure the laws are enforced, borders, the money's good, contracts are enforceable. That's the fence. Stop right there. But nobody needs to lie awake at night worried about the government intruding just everywhere.
Yeah, so I mean, a libertarian perspective is interesting, but that would also lead to, I think the problem is you have these gray areas in light of what you're saying there. So there's a whole lot of places where people would say, yeah, you're absolutely right, but then somebody says, yes, you're right. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to have these books in the libraries, or Flamey Grant come and read to the kids, and that kind of thing. And people are gonna be like, wait a minute, let's pick up the fence and let's move it just a little bit more here, because we don't like that stuff.
Every problem, every solution becomes a problem.
That's right. That's, I mean, I think that's probably
Why we
right.
don't do this.
But it's not an argument against solutions. So, anybody else? Yeah, go ahead.
You spoke about how term limits would lead to a new problem. I'm just curious, what kind of problems do you think could arise from term limits?
Okay, members of Congress depend very much on their age. This is sort of professional class.
Seniority.
And you have term limits and you're retiring somewhat prematurely experienced legislators who know what they're doing. And eventually you have the aides running the government, becoming the legislative branch, just like the bureaucracy is now the executive branch. And a president they don't like will be effectively powerless.
Tom, that has always been the
I
case.
don't
It's
think
not,
it's
hey,
always.
yeah, it's always been the case. Take it from someone who served on congressional staffs as well as on the White House staff. The staff is the one who makes the decisions. The leaders of this country that are elected don't have the time
So
to.
term limits would not fix
It
that.
would not fix it, because the staff runs everything. It's through our lens that they're gonna see. This guy comes in as a congressman, and we're gonna put paperwork in front of him. I know, I lived that life for 10 years. And sir, sign here. You don't know what you're signing. The only thing you're interested in is your next re-election or looking good in front of the cameras. The legislation you sponsored, you probably didn't even read it.
Yeah.
You didn't even read it. I'm the guy that formulated that, and to make you look good with the folks back home.
That's
There
what
was
staff,
actually- there was an
that's what
instance of
staffers
that.
are for, is reading stuff, right?
There was an instance of that, I forget, a few years ago, there was some kind of committee where the entire bill was like 500 pages, and the congresswoman asked a question, it was her bill, and she didn't even know the answer to it. And she's asking the question, and it's hyperbole since I don't remember what bill it was or who it was, but it's been that issue. But the bigger issue that overall that comes from term limits is whenever you have people like Mitch McConnell, right, who are obviously aged, they've been in government for a while, and they're very publicly having some kind of medical episode,
Or
right?
Feinstein.
On both sides, right? So you have people who are in Congress that don't need to be there anymore. They're having some kind of cognitive issue, and so people start yelling term limits in order to fix that. But even if you have a term limit of, say, 2 terms, somebody can come in whenever they're 70 years old and run for the first time.
That's
To
true.
be-
So
to be
how do
fair-
you solve that? And this was actually an argument I got into on Reddit about how do you solve this? And the
Which is where really great,
people actually supported this.
really great arguments take place there, but, to be fair, on the final thing, it has been deemed that he does not have a cognitive impairment, that's not the problem there.
Right, but that's the perception, right?
Right, fair
So
enough.
it's
It's just the start,
perception.
it's just the start of the next zombie apocalypse, that's
Let's
exactly.
go to you, Lydia.
So if the issue, the term limits would be the possibility of people just the same coming in, would the option be to put age limits on that are stricter, and how would you go about deciding the age limit?
Well, that's the question, right? Is how do you decide who can run for Congress, right? How do you decide that?
The Constitution already gives those guidelines.
Exactly.
So should we put it up?
No.
Is that the
Right,
question?
so the issue is, and what I argued on Reddit, which, don't go against my Reddit, is to have these cognitive tests, right? To see if they are capable of being in our government, but the issue always arises that, well, after they've been in for a year, maybe they develop something, right? So there's no, it's a question that has no solution.
The other problem with that is that how would you institute age limits without falling guilty to ageism?
It's
And-
discrimination.
Right, and secondly,
It's a federal law.
how can we administer a cognitive test and make sure that that test is free of racial, social, economic bias?
Any kind of bias. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's an interesting, thought-provoking idea, but to Tom's point, solutions to problems, right? So, let's have, we got 15 minutes. Are there any other questions? I mean, I've got some stuff to wrap up with, but If you guys have more questions, let's go with them. Yes, go ahead.
Just to touch on and elaborate on what was said earlier about media coverage after Watergate, this is connected to that. Wouldn't you say that it's less an issue of misinformation existing and more of an issue of the fact that people choose to believe that certain things are only capable of producing misinformation, and that but their guy cannot tell a single lie?
Within the realm of media, you're absolutely right. There's this self-selection bias, right? We watch media that already comports with what we believe in. It's why conservatives watch Fox News, why liberals watch MSNBC, right? So I think
Or Communist News Network.
And the social media algorithms are set up to feed you that stuff.
exactly right. So there's the self-selection bias, so that you are getting more of that. I'll let somebody else build on that. But yeah, I think that there's merit to that.
And there's also, especially in the 70s and 80s, and 90s, before social media came out, was the idolization of certain newscasters or writers, right?
Walter Cronkite.
Walter
The most
Cronkite,
trusted
Bob
man.
Woodard. After Watergate, right? After the Pentagon Papers were put out, Woodard could do no wrong. Anything he said was gold, right? And so there's that issue. Trust everything that your congressman said, because your congressman couldn't ever lie to you, right? Because you're the one who voted for them.
And if you find out that they do, there's swift, decisive action from people. I mean, at a time, right? I mean, it was
Yeah.
like, if I find out my congressman lies to me, well, he's not getting voted in anymore. But that seems to be
Well,
changing.
there was, I mean, especially if you look at this on a grand scale of, presidents or congressmen who were proven to do something wrong through maybe an impeachment process, there's still going to be people who are supportive of them to the detriment of the government, right? I'm not talking about Donald Trump at all.
Andrew Johnson.
I think Andrew Johnson is probably the only one that you can look at who didn't have like a constituency who really strongly supported him post impeachment, but every other president who's been impeached, which is not very many, but every other president who's been impeached has had its own constituency. I mean,
Yeah.
Bill Clinton
Even-
left the office as like the highest approval
Oh, yeah.
ratings of any president who's ever left office.
Nixon still had supporters too.
Yeah.
He wasn't
Jokes on
impeached.
y'all.
Nixon was not impeached.
He was not impeached, but he was about to be, and he stepped down. But the point is that even after the Pentagon Papers were put out,
Right.
he was still supported.
In the very beginning, in the 1790s, we invented the revolution, we got the articles, we got the Constitution, and then rather to the surprise of the governing class, they found out they didn't all agree with each other. These were 18th century men trained in 18th century modes of thought. They believed in the truth with a capital T. It was objective, it was what it was. And you arrive at the truth by reason with a big capital R. And the assumption was, I have searched my heart, I know that I have applied reason honestly, and I've arrived at these conclusions. And if you don't agree with me, either you did not apply reason honestly, or you're trying to pull something.
Right.
So we get some of the most.
It's beyond the pale that I can be
gouging eyes out politics in the mid-1790s.
And some things,
Nothing has changed.
some things never change. Yeah, we just changed the tune. It's the same lyrics. Let's see. We've got 10 minutes. Are there any other questions, maybe in a different direction that somebody wants to ask? Like I said, I've got something to wrap up with, but if you've got a question, I'm more interested in your questions. Let's go. I saw you first. Let's go here. Yeah.
Should treaties signed and approved by Congress with foreign powers, such as like the UN, for example, have legal weight over the American citizen, even if it violates a law previous, all the way up, maybe even an amendment? If it's been approved by Congress,
If the Senate approves a treaty that goes against an American law, does it have? Are you thinking of an example? I guess is what I'm wondering.
like the UN, it has its fundamental 35 human rights, but the United States does not. Although it did sign the document that approved those 35 human rights, it does not protect those 35 human rights under its constitution, and sometimes they're even violated at the time of signing, such as with the civil rights, until the movement, of course.
Yeah, Daryl, Foreign Affairs.
The United States is not bound by any treaty unless it's ratified by the United States Senate. That is called advise and consent. That's a separation of powers, okay? So if the US Senate does not consent to it, the United States is not bound by any of that.
I think what he's saying is treaties that are ratified by the Senate. So I think the importance there is that those treaties have nothing to do with the American people, right? We're citing treaties as not the US government, but as a member of the UN, right? So that is a separate entity, and so does not apply to the American people. Most of these treaties are not going to be, nobody's going to have to
It's not a
sign.
domestic issue.
Yeah, it's not a domestic issue, and so the Constitution has only to do with domestic, right, for the most part.
For the most part.
Right, we're gonna assign powers that Congress can do, in foreign affairs, like sign these treaties. But what you're talking about is a completely different issue, and one that we can freely and do repeatedly ignore, like you're saying with civil rights, right?
Yeah, the Constitution overrides any world government. The Constitution of the United States is supreme here. It doesn't matter what the United Nations do or anything like that, it's supreme. The Constitution of the United States is supreme domestically.
The illusion of a world government is.
Not as long as men like me live and breathe.
But, me too.
Yeah, I'll never be a world
They're
government.
like the World Economic Forum. They're gonna spring the trap. It doesn't matter what you think or I think. This thing could be coming.
All right, so in the last few minutes
We won't worry
here,
about the Bill of
I'll
Rights.
give you some follow-up. So we've had a discussion about from where the attack is coming, what is exactly under attack, how we think about these kinds of things. And I appreciate you guys participating. So here's the kind of wrap-up question, and if we stall here, there may be some other ways to push this forward. But so assuming that there is a sense in which certain of the Bill of Rights are under attack from certain other aspects of society, even if those aspects of society are a little vague and shadowy and mysterious, right? What is the defense? Right, so the Bill of Rights, obviously, an inanimate thing, is not a living and breathing person or document or anything like that. So it obviously needs us, people, to come to its defense. What is the defense of the Bill of Rights under attack? This, I think, is an element of the question that the gentleman back here was asking, kind of in that. What's the solution kind of way? But what is the defense to the attack?
Vote
Yeah.
for candidates who will promise, to defend it. And all it has, it's a piece of paper. The only power it has comes from our commitment to it. It's not perfect. It was written by members of a fallen race like you and me. So it's not perfect, but in a long perspective, we were the first country in the world to get the smart guys together and design a government. All the others just evolved. So we took some cues from the British and such as that with their constitution, which is not like ours, but it's the first of its kind. But again, it can't defend itself. So the better people understand it, the more we see that the system as originally designed would obviate much of the stuff we're talking about today, because the state governments would still have wide latitude, and the national government would be limited to basically a short list of functions, and we wouldn't be worried about the meaning of the Bill of Rights and that sort of thing.
I think I'd build on that actually, Tom, and say that civic literacy is what we need to defend, and not just the Bill of Rights, but the Constitution in general. I think the events of January 6th rather showed us that some folks have this fundamental misunderstanding of how the Constitution operates. I just saw a video the other day of Mike Pence at a rally, and this woman was just deriding him, like, you could have sent those votes back, you could have done this, and Mike Pence said, man, I was sent there to count the votes, protect the Constitution, right? He'd read it. He's say what you will about Mike Pence, he's a constitutional defender, right? So I think more people knowing what it is that the Constitution says and what the government can and cannot do is important. Voting absolutely is crucial. But you've got a lot of folks out there speaking with a lot of certainty about what the Constitution says, and they're absolutely 100% wrong, right? I do believe there's disinformation, and I believe it spreads, and I believe it's dangerous. I believe one of the biggest threats to democracy is disinformation spreading
I'm
around.
still not gonna go with disinformation because.
That's fine, it's a semantics
That a
argument.
governing
It
party
still exists.
can define what's true and what's false. It's
And,
up to you.
and I have a fundamental disagreement. The people on January 6th did know what they were doing. They were expressing their First Amendment rights.
And they weren't there to attack democracy. They believed that democracy was
Was being
in the
attacked.
House.
Because they had a fundamental misunderstanding of how the president's elected.
No, they understood how the president's elected.
They were trying to
We were
subvert
always
it.
told, I'm a child of the Cold War, we were told that we don't need bullets because we have ballots. Trust in the election process is probably at an all-time low, and for good reason.
Because the
So
former
if
president
you
tried to
take
subvert the
that
process.
away,
Absolutely.
then what does that mean? We don't want to see domestic violence.
So in
let's
particular,
have elections where we actually believe that the outcome is fair.
so in
Would you
particular,
believe any outcome is fair if your person you liked did not win?
That's not what I'm saying.
But that's where it comes down to, is the people who believe that an election was unfair are the people on the side that did not win. And that has been consistent for a very, very long period.
On both sides of the equation.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, I'm saying, I'm consistent for a long period of time, is what I'm saying.
Democrats can have forfeits that the election, right, 2016 was rigged, I'm cool with that. But then they're indicting people for having doubts about the 2020 election.
Right.
It's not
Okay, so
about
I
the
wanna-
doubts, it's about the actions that they took on those
Trying
doubts.
to subvert.
in the 2 minutes here left, I want to course correct on the questions, because
Sorry, Greg.
the question,
You've done a great job.
so let's say that, so voting is a legitimate, civil literacy, voting,
Well, I have another answer to that.
Yeah,
question.
no, go ahead.
Which is, I think we also need actual people to vote for that actually might make a difference. I think we have a very fossilized system of Democrats and Republicans that do not actually present options for most people that they are interested. I mean, going back to your earlier question about, like, he's telling you to vote, but the question is, who would you vote for? I mean, you are very likely in this upcoming election to have two really old guys to vote for one or the other who probably neither of them has a whole lot to do with you or anything that you are personally interested in, and barely functions in the society that exists right now. And it's, we have this thing of, look at who is actually out there to vote for. I mean, in the state of Texas, you have so many elections that aren't contested at all. I mean, you don't even have a choice as to, if you don't vote in the primary for the Republican Party, you don't actually have a choice to make. And then it's the same in California. You don't have a choice to make on the Democratic side. And I think that there has to be, because he was talking about not just the voting, but we've got to get more people out there and active and interested, and not feeling like, I think this comes back to the distrust, not feeling like I can't make a difference. And I think we are told over and over again that an individual can't make a difference. And that there is this kind of shadowy government thing out there that's basically going to take away anything that you might do. And as long as we all believe that, nothing's going to change.
Hopeless, right?
Yeah, it's hopeless. It's hopeless because if there's some shadowy force back there who's undermining every single election and making sure that, only the things they want happen, then it doesn't matter if you vote. It doesn't matter who is running. It doesn't matter anything.
Yeah.
So we have this fundamental belief that shapes the candidates that we get, which makes it to where, why would you? I mean, I leave my students with that. I leave my students with the hopeful thing that you say of, you are the generation that can make the difference. But I also say, it's not going to be easy, and every single thing you hear is going to make it sound like it doesn't matter what you do.
yeah, because absent involvement, it's just political nihilism.
Yeah, and if you get to the point of we can't make a change because something bad might happen later, then why ever change? No
Okay,
change
guys.
needs to ever happen.
So we're out of time. Save your questions for after. They may hang around for a bit, but yeah, we're 15 minutes to 1. Thank you guys for being here. Let's show our appreciation.